Hi everyone, my name's Paul from Bernie's Learnings. This video is the first in a series that is designed to make it easy to learn how to use VBA, and it's particularly targeted at those people that work as professionals in offices, in sales or marketing or procurement or something like that, where you're dealing with a lot of data and there's a lot of sort of laborious tasks that you want to start to be able to automate. So in this first lesson, what we've been learning how to do is firstly set up VBA so you can learn to code. And then we'll be doing your first lessons on how to use a message box and how to reference cells on a spreadsheet. All right, so let's get into it. So the first thing we need to be able to do is to set up Excel to be able to work so that you can access the VBA editor. Now to do that, there's a tab called Developer. Now for most people, if you haven't used VBA before, it won't appear because it's not the default setup for Excel. Now to get the Developer tab to appear, what you need to do is just go down to, I think it's More and Options. And in the options, you need to go to Customize Ribbon. In the Customize Ribbon area, normally the default setting will look like this, where you'll have everything ticked except the Developer tab, and all you need to do is tick the box for the Developer tab, and then it should appear in your ribbon, just like it does in mine. So that's the first thing you need to do. Now the second thing you need to do in setting up the particular file that you're using is to save the correct file type. So when I click Save As, so I previously saved this file, and I've given it the name My First Code, but if you're saving it for the first time, the default setting is an Excel workbook. Now, the problem with that is that that type of Excel file will not store VBA code. So if you write all this fantastic code and then you save it, what will happen is that you'll lose the code. So to make sure you keep the code, what you need to do is select the in macro enabled Excel workbook. Once you do that, then it has the capacity to store that code along with the file. And anytime that you save from that point onwards, it will save not only the code, the file itself, but the code in the background. You don't need to do anything special. So from this point onwards, every time you do an update, because the file is already set as a macro enabled file, if I just click save, it will save anything that I've done in the background with the VBA code as well. Okay, now on to accessing the VBA code. So if we go to the Visual Basic Editor, this is what the Visual Basic Editor looks like. Now sometimes people will not get it looking exactly the same as what I have here. Okay, so if you have that, if you want exactly the same setup, what you need to go to is View, and usually you have Excel Explorer, which gives you kind of the areas where code is stored. And the other useful thing to have on the side is the window properties, because that is useful because it gives you names of things, which sometimes is not so obvious. Now, in terms of where you can code, now when you're going to VBA for the first time, it may look like a grey screen without this white screen. How you create that is you can code into modules. This is not the only place, by the way, that you can code. Now, to create a module, which will give you a white space to be able to create it, to do your code, you can just click Insert a module, and you'll see in my case it's put in Module 3. Now what I have is I have 3 places to code. So sometimes when your code gets more complex, you'll need multiple areas to be able to place it. But once you have that, then you've got an area to be able to do your code. Now the first thing we want to learn is how to create a program, which is referred to as a subroutine. Now when you're doing it, you need to make sure that you name your subroutine with something that makes sense, because as you go along and you get more and more complex programs where you have many different macros or little programs, then you need to make sure that the name of it makes sense so you can find it easily. So in this case, I'm just going to call it My First Code. Now, I'll get an error And now the reason why I'll get an error is because when you're naming something like this, it needs to be one word. So if you have something that has all one word, then if you put an underscore in there or a hyphen or something like that, that will work fine. Okay, so now that it's happy with that, what happens is you'll see that the actual commands themselves turn blue. And so this is the start of the code and this is the finish. So anything in between is the area where you can put some code in. Okay, now the first one we're going to learn is a message box. So a message box is tremendously useful for debugging and seeing what your code is doing. But just to start off, we're going to start by getting it to just give us a message. So hello, I might have put hello world, that's what everyone seems to do. And once you've done that, any text that you put in should be in talking marks. So where the text, anything you want to display needs to be surrounded by talking marks. Now if I click OK, then you can see that it sends the user a message, and it will stay on the screen until I click OK, and that's the end of the subroutine, and we'll come back to your code. Now, sometimes it might be necessary to get information from two different places. So, for example, you might have in one cell some information, like let's say the hello might be in one cell and world might be in another. So we need to be able to display two types of data. So what we'll do now is show you how to do that. So if I create a message box and I give it hello world, I've got hello and then I've got hello world. What happens is, of course, we get the hello and then we get the world. Now, if we want that in the one command and the pieces of information happen to be coming from somewhere else, we can put in an and symbol in between. And that is like a concatenate, in that we'll put those two pieces of information together. So we push play. Now what we've got is hello world, but obviously we would want a space in between, so we can add that now. So we can do that by putting in a talking mark with a space in between each and an and so now we can display the message as three different pieces of information. So that's how you do that. Now, so far we've looked at text. Now we'll have a quick look at numbers. So for numbers, they operate a little bit differently to text, in that if I put in the number 4, you don't need to put talking marks around it. Okay, so if it's an actual number, you can just put in hello and 4 and it will display the number 4. Now the other thing that's quite cool that you can also do is that you can actually do calculations on the fly as well. So for example, and I'll just get rid of the hello text for the moment. Let's say we want to do 4 times 5. So the symbol for getting a multiplication is just the asterisk number. Now, and so if we put 4 times 5, we don't get 4-5, we actually get the multiplication being completed. And if we were to if we show you the other symbols, that so plus is fairly obvious, and then if we do minus, just so you've seen all of the different basic operations, -1, you can see that it's just doing the calculation on the fly, and then divide by, which is a backslash. Okay, so that's basically how those numbers work. Now, when you're doing your code for the first time too, it's a good idea to be able to, particularly when you're starting right at the beginning, is you sometimes want to be able to put in some comments. So you can go, well, this piece of code does this, and this piece of code does that. Now, to be able to do that, if you use an apostrophe and then put in this creates a user message, oops, try spelling it correctly. Okay, and if I click OK, well, what happens is that if it has an apostrophe at the front of it, the VBA editor ignores that line, and so you can therefore use it for messages, and it will turn it green. So you've got you're able to document your code as you go along, which is useful, particularly as your code can get more complex. Now, the next thing we want to do is, because obviously doing some multiplication or sending the user some information is not terribly useful. So what we want to do is learn how to reference cells. Now, to do that, what I'm going to do, because I don't want to lose this, whenever you get a good piece of code or something that works, what I tend to do, particularly early on, is I'll just put an apostrophe in it. So I'm just basically turning that line off, but I've still got the code there if I want to use it later on. Okay, so to be able to reference a cell, what you can do is we need to identify the worksheet. Now, this is not absolutely essential, but I recommend it because it makes your cell references much more specific. So, for example, this macro with the second part of the code I'm about to give you, without that piece of information, will only select the code on the active sheet, so the particular cell on the active sheet. Whereas if you're specifying a worksheet, it means that you're being very specific, and it doesn't matter where the macro is run from in the spreadsheet, and it will still give you the actual cell that you're interested. Now we can reference this by then specifying the sheet, the cell reference. So if I want cell A1, which is the first cell in the top left-hand corner, I can just do that. So that's how I reference a cell. Now, to be able to assign a value to the code, I'm going to put in 6. Okay. Now, if I run my code, nothing appears to happen. But if I go to my reference here, you'll see that cell A1 now has the value 6 in it. So that's how you assign values. So that means this is how you can write information to a sheet without a user actually entering it. Now, obviously, the same things apply in terms of text. So if I want to put some text in there, then I might put in I need to put talking marks around it. If I click play there and I go back to it, now it's putting in text. Now, obviously, the same things also apply in terms of if we want to put in 2 pieces of data, we need to put an and between it. So you'll see that if we go again, I'll just run it again, you'll see it's text 6. Okay, so that means that that's how you can reference data. So I'm going to create a second line of code where I'm going to assign a second value. So in this case, I'm going to go to cell A2 and I'm going to assign, just so it's more obvious, I'm going to do the number 8. Now, once we do that, we've now assigned it to 2 different places, the values. Now, if I want to pick that information up to be able to do a calculation on the fly, what I need to be able to do is, instead of putting numbers, I want to put the cell references. Now, so I'm going to put in message box, and this time I'm going to put in cell A1, and I want that to be multiplying cell A2. And you'll see I haven't it's expecting something after the asterisk, so it gives me an error. That's okay. Okay, and now, and I'm going to turn this off, and I'll show you why in a second. Turn these 2 pieces of code off. Okay, now when I run my message box, it's picking up this information. Now, the reason this is a far better way to code is that the other way to obviously do this calculation would be to do a message box and then actually put the physical values, so 6 times by 8. Now, the reason this is a less preferable way to do it is because this is what's called hard coding your data into there. Now, there are reasons why sometimes you'll do that, but there are some disadvantages to doing that as well. So if we do our first line of code, we did our calculation 6 divided by times by 8, and we picked up the data from the 2 cells to do that. And then the second one is we hard coded in the values. Now the problem with that is if the user comes along and they change the values, so let's say we change that value to 8 and we run our code again, then what happens is that the numbers we want to multiply when you're referencing the cell is dynamic, which means that the user, as soon as they enter that a new value, the calculation will still be accurate for the values in that cell. Whereas if it's hard coded in, it will remain at 48 because you've hard coded in the values that you're going to multiply. So that's why this, in all cases, is preferable, or not all cases, but most cases, is preferable because it makes your code dynamic. Now, the next thing we're going to get you guys to learn is a couple of other things, and this will be it for the lesson, is we want to be able to, obviously you see me flicking in between the code here and, sorry, the spreadsheet and the Visual Basic Editor to be able to activate the code. So we want to be able to activate the code and make it easier. So let's say you send that file to someone else and you want them to be able to use this code that you've created, but obviously, particularly if you're giving it to someone who doesn't know anything about VBA, you don't want them going into the VBA code to run it. So what we want to do is create a button that activates that. So if you go to the Developer tab and click Insert, what we can do is we can create a button, and then it will automatically tell you to assign a macro. Now you'll see that the name of the macro, my code, was the name of the macro or the little program that I've been creating. So I can assign that so that each time it's clicked, it will run the code. Okay, and if I want to give it a descriptive name, then I can give it any name I like on there. Let's say do calculation. And let's say we'll change the numbers again, and the user comes along and clicks it, and it will produce the macro and run the macro. So that's one way to trigger a macro. Okay, now the last thing we're going to teach you, which will allow you to do the little activity that we want, that will help you to consolidate your understanding of how the code's working, is we're going to give you another command. So this one is called date, and what date does is that it gives you today's date. So if you put in date like that, you'll see that it returns the value 80 and then today's date. So that second line of code, that's how you create today's date. So if you were to run this tomorrow, it would give you tomorrow's date, which would be the 3rd of October. Now, having done that, you've now got enough information to be able to do your first activity, which is we're going to get you guys to calculate the number of days that somebody's been alive. So we want the user's name, so for example, my name, and we want the macro to calculate based on today's date how many days I've been alive. So have a go at trying to do that, and it's a good idea to pause the video, have a go, and then restart the video, and I'll give you the solution if you're having difficulty. Okay, so here's the solution. So what I've done to do this is I've created a spreadsheet and I've put my name in and my date of birth. Okay, you may have used a different cell, and that's fine, and that's okay. And now what we're going to do is we're going to create a new subroutine. So I can create a new subroutine just below, and I'm going to call it days alive. Okay. Now, when you're going about these sort of things, the first thing you want to do is you want to break down the steps of what you're trying to create, okay, and work out all the information, and just do it step by step. So the end result that we want is we want a message with my name in it telling me the days that I have been alive. So what I can do is I can and always use code that you've already got and paste it in. Don't try and retype it because you can sometimes create yourself syntax errors. And what we want to do now is we want to reference the cell of my name, which was in cell B1. Okay, so that's the first thing we need to do. We need to pick up that name. Okay, so I'm now going to test it. Now, if I test it, I'm not getting the result that I'm expecting. So the obvious question is, we want to make sure that the question is why. Now, I've actually done that on purpose because it's also a very good way of kind of looking at the beginnings of how you debug code when it's not doing what you expect. So in this case, what you want to do is carefully look at the reference. So we've got cell B1, okay, and we're on cell B1, which is that one, so we know that's correct, okay, and the other common thing is the name of the sheet. So the name of the sheet is not correct. If we have a look at sheet 1, not sheet 2, we're actually on sheet 2 there. So we do that now, we've corrected the code and we've picked up the name. And the next thing we want to have is we want to have and. So we want pull is. Now, what I'm going to do at this point is I'm just going to put in a placeholder. Let's say 12 days old, 12. And then we want to put in old. So we've kind of got building up the message that we want to create without having done the calculation. Okay, so once we do that, we've got an example. Okay, we didn't get Paul's day. So we actually probably want days old, actually. Okay, just so it's displaying exactly what we want is 12 days old. Okay, now once we've got that part of this message display to the user is what we want. Now the next thing that we can do, and you could do it in either order, is then we want to work out a method to be able to actually calculate the date. So we've got today's date, which we can change that to date, and we want to do a calculation which is minus the date of birth. And again, to do that, we need a cell reference. So I'm just going to take the cell reference from over here, and I'm going to put in a 2. Okay, and once we do that and push play, whoa, we've forgotten to take the 12 out, haven't we? This is why you test things. Okay, and that should then give us the correct answer. What would have, so Paul is 18,606 days old. Okay, so we've now got the code to do. Now, just to finish this off, just so you're getting practice, you should also be assigning this macro to a but. So to do that, what we need to do is create a but, which just like we did before, and we need to assign it. So the code that we were trying to run is days alive, and then you might give it the name, days alive. Okay. And once we do that, then our macro is working as expected. Now, I hope it was useful. Make sure that if you are having trouble with the code that you go back and you have a go at it, because the only way to learn VBA is to actually do it. All right, we'll see you in the next lesson. We'll take it a step further. Thanks, guys. Bye.